Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Obviously, I'm introducing myself this morning, but you all know me. So, what I wanted to do today was actually go to some place that I think we've not been before. And it was based, actually, the talk I'm going to give you is based on this book, Thanks for the Feedback, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. I highly recommend everybody read it. It comes from the same folks who wrote the Difficult Conversations book and the Crucial Conversations book. So it's all from the Harvard Negotiations Project. And the theme of this, what we're going to talk about today, is actually not how to give feedback, but how to receive feedback and how to have your ears be open to feedback when you get it. It was interesting for me when I read the book. I think that it actually has made me give feedback better as well. But that's not the agenda. The agenda today is for us to be thinking about how we can hear the feedback without pushing back. So because we're a clinical audience, we're going to start with a case. You're a new program director. You've been in your position for a little less than a year. You love your job. It's exciting. You think you're making a difference. You have wonderful associate program directors and chief medical residents. You feel valued and appreciated, and again, that you are making a difference. You are, however, extremely busy. You're on several national committees, have lots of travel commitments. Everyone seems to want a piece of you, and oh, by the way, you have 2 small children at home. You're finishing up a busy day. Your plan is to meet with your chiefs and then head over to the long-planned intern selection committee meeting. You're very excited because this will be your first big show. The first intern selection committee meeting you're running, these will be your first interns because the group of house staff you're working with now were chosen by the previous program director. So you arrive for the meeting with your chiefs, and suddenly the day loses its glamour. Your chiefs are angry. They were supposed to meet with you on Monday, and you stood them up. You apologized, telling them that on your calendar this meeting was moved to today because the chief of medicine needed to see you during the Monday time. The chiefs are not soothed. They unleash a torrent of complaints, which include the following. You are never available. You are disrespectful of their time. You repeatedly reschedule or cancel meetings. You are scattered and chaotic. They have problems they need to discuss with you, and they cannot get your attention. You are blindsided. You're hurt. You're angry. The tears come. What do you do? And or think, and what's in your brain now? It was in the wrong room. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Haley. Actually, or we were in the wrong room. Is it better? Okay. Okay. So you, if I were to reframe that, you're saying, don't lose it because maybe they don't mean what they're saying. Okay. Okay. Why now? What did you ever now?
I would maybe ask them
Okay.
things that so that you could look at things that could be improved in terms of those examples. Maybe there's a pattern.
Okay. So you're saying, I'm going to reframe what you said as well, because once I want what you guys say to match my slides coming up, which is the piece a little bit about stepping back and saying, is there truth here? Is there truth? and getting more information. Other thoughts?
Regardless of truth, their feelings, they're really, for whatever reason, you have to know.
Okay. Okay. So, but what we often do though is say, I hear you're really upset. And what's the next word? But, right? But I didn't reschedule the meeting. The chief rescheduled the meeting. I didn't know I had the meeting on my calendar. It was today. I didn't stand you up. What do you mean I'm never available for you? Right? I mean, it's defensive. It's arguing the truth of the feedback. And you were sort of saying, keep it in perspective, that maybe validate the emotions, keep it in perspective, that maybe they don't really hate you as much as it appears today.
I would echo the apology.
Okay. Okay. You guys are a very mature group. Does anyone think, because I have to say, I would have thought this. Who the hell are these people to be talking to me like this? I'm the program director. They're my chiefs. Where's the respect that I'm due?
I sort of had that feeling, and I think the first thing that came to my mind is, okay, I need to deal with like whether these things are true about me or not. But the place I wanted to go is I wanted to teach them how to give feedback in a more effective way. Like I see it like in two ways. Like, yes, this happens to be about me, but in general, this is not a great way to give feedback. And I feel like because you're my chief, that I need to help them in their professional development on how to be more effective.
Not only are you wrong about me, but you're wrong about how you did it. Right.
That's more how I think about it.
Right.
Right.
Well,
The difference is that if somebody above me gave me this feedback, I would not go so far as to try to teach them how to be more effective in their feedback. But if someone, that I feel responsible for in whatever way gave me this feedback, then I don't know that in the moment I would address it like that. That's not the first place I would go. And I know that this is about receiving feedback and not giving feedback, but that's not a great way to give feedback. So,
Here.
Is it possible that they're correct on everything?
Is it possible that they're correct? Right? So that's the piece about being open to hearing it. And probably what is possible is that in fact life is chaotic because this person is overextended and the chiefs are feeling unappreciated, right? And yet at the same time, what's this person going to feel? It's not my fault, right? The chair wanted me. I'm on all these national committees. I do the best I can with the time I have, right? I'm already overextended and I'm trying so hard, and now you're just being mean to me, right?
The response to a garrison one is they're not black and white against you. I think you're saying
Well, I think the questions that you guys have all come to is what is truth, right? Feelings are real, independent of issues. Certainly, this person is overextended. So one of the questions has to be, looking at the balance of time, and at the very least, thinking about this is clearly the chiefs have been perceived as the people who could be moved around the most, right? And maybe that needs to change. So, So we'll come back to the case. This was a true mentoring consult for me. We'll come back. So feedback. We've all grown up receiving endless feedback. We are graded, rated, and ranked. We are coached, screened, and scored. We are picked first, picked last, or not picked at all. These are some of the wording that the book uses, and the next line in the book is, and this is all before you get out of kindergarten, right? So we grow up being evaluated many times. We talk a lot in this session about sort of giving feedback is important. We talk about how to give feedback. We talk about how it's tough to give feedback. And we all talk about how we want feedback. But actually, I think none of us really, what kind of feedback do we all want? You're so good. You were just great. Thank you so much. So receiving actually constructive, and I'm going to use the term constructive rather than negative, feedback is tough. It's tough because it may be unfair. It's tough because the timing is bad. You can certainly argue that the timing of feedback that program director got was unfair, right? Because they left that meeting and went straight to a department-wide intern selection committee that she was running with her chiefs, right? Who does this person think they are to be giving me feedback? This is particularly true if you're getting feedback from those below you on the pecking order. If you get feedback from someone above you on the pecking order, it still may be unfair and the timing may be bad, but at least that person is appropriate to give you feedback. And then I think some of what you saw in the first case is, yeah, all that's true, but there are reasons for it. You just don't understand why what happened. And so we run the risk when we get the feedback we say we want and that we ask for of feeling unappreciated, demotivated, and indignant. And all of those emotions shut our ears off, so we don't hear it. So the conundrum is when we give feedback, we notice that the receiver isn't very good at receiving, right? We talk a lot among ourselves about giving feedback to medical students, and we try to give them feedback, and all they want to know is why they didn't get an honors. They don't want to hear the feedback about their skill set or what's going on. When we receive feedback, the giver wasn't very good. They didn't understand. They were unfair. So, in fact, it's challenging on both ends. The problem with feedback. Comment from a spouse. I don't like the way those pants look on you. What did the spouse mean? First of all, extraordinarily bold spouse, right? Extraordinary. So what did the spouse mean? What are the options?
Are they too baggy? Are they too tight? Maybe baby.
So one is, I don't like the way you look as my spouse. What's the other? Ugly pants. We're going to a party. You want to look good. I don't know why you don't know they're ugly, but they're ugly, right? So I'm actually trying to be helpful, not give you and imply. Jason's over here laughing. He can't even keep a straight face. Okay. So what did the spouse mean? Something wrong with the pair of pants? They're too baggy, they're too tight, they've got a hole in them. But maybe it was a passive-aggressive response to the weight I've gained. It's another dig about how my bell bottoms are still in the past and I need to move on. I love my bell bottoms, but no one else does. Or maybe, are you just trying to help me look nice for the party, right? Feedback is tough. And what I want to point out is, why does the receiver not know what the giver meant? So it was negative. It's really vague. It's a label. Those pants don't look good. Without any, it's a label, right? It's a summary, if you will, of whatever it was that was in the giver's head. So what is feedback? Feedback is any information you get about yourself. It's how we learn about ourselves from the experiences and from other people. So some feedback you get, right, is if you go to a party and you tell a joke and it falls flat. I mean, nobody had to give you the feedback. You just learn. We all learn some things that work that some don't. But feedback is also from other people, and it's not just what gets ranked. It's not just evaluative feedback. It's not grades. It's not ranking. It's not being picked for the team. It's what you get thanked on. It's what gets commented on. Are you invited back, or do you just no one ever calls you again? Feedback is formal, informal, direct, and implied, and all of those things are out there. And I think one of the interesting things, actually, I think maybe you said it, about the fact that this program director clearly had missed some cues. Did you say that? Somebody, okay, good. So somebody, right? So there was presumably some implied and indirect feedback before the explosion. There's actually a fair amount of data, mostly from the business world, that folks who get the term that the authors use as negative feedback, but I would reframe it because we're kinder, gentler in the medical world, as constructive feedback, leads to more rapid growth and improvement. So if we are really serious about being the best we can be, growing, developing, we have no choice but to get good at learning from just about anyone and everyone. So we have to listen to and be open to the feedback. So feedback's good for you, but is it good like a birthday gift or good like a colonoscopy, right? And the problem, particularly with, both of which are good for you and very important, the problem with particularly constructive feedback is that while we desire to learn and improve, we all say we want feedback, we all at the end of a teaching encounter say, tell me what I could have done better, and, my guys always say, meet, for example, student teaching attending, meet with the little third years every day. They all say to me, I would really like it if you would meet with me at the same time every day. And I completely dismiss that feedback because it's impossible for me to do. And yet I hear that, right? So thanks for the feedback, but no. So I get that feedback, but we also long to be loved and accepted and respected just as we are. The very fact that you're getting constructive feedback implies that something's wrong. Something's not as good as it could be. That somehow you didn't meet expectations. So that's what sets up the defensiveness and makes you bristle. Yeah.
Go back to the initial feedback. Like, you could say it was missing the initial feedback, all that stuff, loves it, and all this, that also realizes
so
none of that is there.
So that's the point. The point is the feedback was poorly, and we'll come back to this in a minute. The feedback was poorly timed. There was, at least in my view, it was extremely poorly delivered, right? And yet, at least when I heard it, there's a lot of truth in it, right? And so the question is, how do you put all that together? It's important to remember that feedback sits at that intersection of two needs that we all have, our desires to learn and be the best we can be, and our desires to be loved, right? To be told that we're just perfect. So, receiving feedback well. There's a lot that we can do to reduce the tension in a feedback experience as the receiver. And the thesis of the book, which I completely buy, is that the ability to receive feedback well is not an inborn trait, but a skill that can be cultivated. Now, I will say that there are people who I think take feedback extremely well. I mean, sometimes too well, like, oh, okay, good, thanks, And sometimes I think that doesn't get in, and sometimes they just have enough ego strength that they hear it and take what they need and move on. But for most of us, we're a lot more vulnerable, no matter where we are in the hierarchy. We can all get better at receiving feedback. And remember, feedback is, the better you are at receiving feedback, the more likely you are to get really useful, helpful feedback, right? Because you certainly know if you've tried to give feedback to somebody and you get shut down, you're never going to tell your spouse about those pants again, right? So she's going to wear those bell bottoms forever and look horrible, but someone else will have to tell her because she did not respond well. The thing I want you to remember is that receiving feedback well doesn't mean you have to take it. It actually doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's right. There always is, Dr. Zimmer would say, two sides to the pancake. And the giver saw what they saw. Doesn't mean that the giver's feelings are not appropriate. Feelings always matter. Feelings are truth. But it may, in fact, not be something that you can do something about. So receiving feedback well means engaging in the conversation and making thoughtful choices about what to do with what you receive. It means looking for being open that there are kernels of truth, even in feedback that was poorly given or made you feel bad. Okay? And that's the challenge, because most of us, I certainly get defensive when I hear it. And I want to explain why. Because it's always the I know but. I used to tell my kids when they were small, actually, I still tell them when they're not that small, that I'm sorry, but the but completely negates the I'm sorry, right? You can't say I'm sorry, but, because all you're doing is trying to establish why you were right. So then I'm sorry, and even if you just want to do the ever popular, I'm sorry you feel that way, you're not right. But I'm so sorry you feel that way. That's a better opening than the I'm sorry, but. Okay, so understanding feedback. So the first challenge in understanding feedback is we often don't know what the purpose of feedback is or what we're supposed to do with the feedback. And the point of this is that feedback comes in lots of different ways. A pat on the back is feedback. Good job. You look great today. Love those pants. Or it comes from somebody who chews you out. I mean, think about it if you're on the wards and a nurse takes you to task for something. That's feedback. It may be feedback that you just presented your construct poorly. May not be wrong, but maybe the way you developed it, maybe the timing was wrong. Helpful pointers are feedback, and so is getting voted off the island. It's all feedback. We live in a world of feedback. People laugh at your jokes. People don't laugh at your jokes. They ask you to be on committees. They don't ask you to be on committees. We tend to think of feedback as being that performance evaluation you get every year or the grade you get. But there's feedback, we just swim in it. So the first agenda to think about different kinds of feedback and what the giver of feedback is trying to do with the feedback. Feedback comes in three forms, and we have smiley face, neutral face, sad face. Appreciation, job well done, thanks, this is the good feedback, and that's feedback. What you did was well liked, so you should do more of it, right? This is the kind of feedback we all want. Everybody likes this feedback. Probably don't get enough smiley face feedback. Coaching is probably the place where feedback is the best given and received, as long as the dynamic of coaching is established. Coaching is about being given information about what you need to do better. We tend to think of coaching as coming from people who are our mentors, who are superiors, just like when we watch all the fellows teach. We coach them. We tell them things that they could do better or things that they could do differently. So when you're working with a mentor, that's what coaching's all about. And we actually tend to be quite receptive to that constructive feedback because that coaching relationship has been established. That person has the duty, the right, the responsibility, and you've invited them to give you coaching feedback. The problem with coaching comes in is when it comes from an unexpected source. And it can be meant extremely well, but sometimes it's hard to hear if you haven't established that relationship. And then, of course, there's evaluation. Here's where you stand. Very often the receiver wants to hear one kind of feedback, which is different from the feedback that the giver actually meant to give. And so one of the tricks about feedback is to ask for what you need. If you really want to know what you could have done better, ask for that. If you don't really want to know what you could have done better, Just say, did you enjoy my lecture? Right? Know what you're asking for and try to figure out what the other person is doing. So the first take-home message is knowing what you want and know what you're getting, because the match matters. You know, if I've worked really, really hard on a lecture and I sweated over it and I just wanted to be told that it came off well because all of my effort, you know, what was good about it, and somebody tells me the 3 things I could improve, I'm probably not open to it. Now, on the other hand, that person may be thinking they're really doing me a favor, because coaching is really important. So the first step in thinking about receiving the feedback is to understand, and this is what sort of Ronnie was talking about in a minute, that emotions are high. And the thing I want to play out here is emotions are high with the giver of feedback. Obviously, the chiefs in the scenario I gave were really mad, felt devalued, were hot and bothered. I think we're a little entitled. But, you know, there were a lot of emotions going on there. But you also have to think about your own emotions, because your own emotions become obstacles to hearing and learning from the feedback. This is what we call feedback triggers. Triggered reactions are not obstacles because they're necessarily unreasonable. If someone tells you something you think is unfair, you're going to get defensive about it. It's not an unreasonable emotional response. It's the same, you know, you have to appreciate for yourself. Just as we say a feedback giver, their emotions are what they are, right? You can't change your emotions. You can only change how you act on them. So if you have an emotional response, a feedback trigger gets pulled when you hear feedback, you can't beat yourself up for that. Your emotions are what they are, but it's what you do with them. The feedback triggers are obstacles in receiving feedback because they keep you from engaging in the conversation. We tend to stop hearing the feedback and go to the emotions rather than asking for more. Receiving feedback well is a process of sorting and filtering, trying to figure out how the other person really sees it. What, you know, we talk about when we give feedback to learners that you have to be specific, right? Don't just say you need to be more organized. Tell them why you think they're not organized. But receiving feedback is the same thing. Not every feedback giver is skillful. So often we get told feedback just with a label or a conclusion. What happens to someone who's giving feedback is they see something, they get data, they take that data in and they interpret it. That interpretation gives a label, and the feedback that comes back to you is the label. And you have no understanding of the data or the interpretation that got to the label. And the label may or may not be fair, the data may or may not be complete, but unless you can engage in that conversation, you're never ever going to figure that out. You're just going to respond to the label. And frankly, receiving feedback well is about trying on ideas that you don't like. It's about keeping the parts that feel right and discarding the parts of the feedback that in the end seem off or not what you need to know. And when I work with the fellows and they get their first teaching evaluations, they're absolutely crushed if they get a bad evaluation, right? I get my evaluations now and I look at them and I go, stupid feedback, stupid feedback, stupid feedback. Right, you know, because there are things that I can't do anything about, or, you know, we get feedback from the medical students from the 3rd year saying they'd really like to only work 5 days, not 6, because it would give them more time to read. That's feedback. That's stupid feedback, right? I mean, I can't change that. I'm not going to do anything about it. On the other hand, we get feedback back from the students saying that they're not getting enough opportunity to present their patients. That's feedback we have. And my first reaction is, I don't understand how you can possibly say that. You work with a patient every other day. You're on the ward. You know, like, that's tend to go to that stupid feedback too. But actually, that one I stopped and think. So it's about sorting and filtering, but you have to be open enough to think about it. So there are 3 feedback triggers to be aware of. Truth triggers, relationship triggers, and identity triggers. Truth triggers are set off by the substance of the feedback. You think it's off, it's unhelpful or simply untrue. You're not chaotic. You make time for the Chiefs. What the hell is their problem? The response is to feel indignant, wronged, or exasperated, right? This feedback is unfair because it's untrue. Now remember, typically the feedback you got was the value judgment. It wasn't the data or the interpretation. It was the label. So the label may or may not be unfair, but you're never going to know that unless you go back and get the data. Relationship triggers, this is the spouse in the pants. It's triggered by the particular person giving you feedback. The feedback is colored by the relationship. And the focus shifts from the feedback to the audacity of the giver, as in, how dare my chief say this to me? Or it also then becomes about the relationship issues. And the kernel of truth that is in the feedback may be lost. Because in a relationship where feedback is given, there are both the relationship communication issues, and there's also, and while that relationship may be fraught with hazard, that person also probably sees you pretty well. So there may be truth in that feedback. And then the one that I find the hardest to actually receive personally is identity triggers. You know, when somebody tells me something about myself that runs contrary to how I think about myself. So identity triggers are about you. You're given something, feedback about a behavior that is the antithesis of how you see yourself. That's really hard. It's really hard because it shakes your core of who you are, and that feedback causes your identity to become undone, and you're threatened, and you don't know what to do with it because it's so opposite from what you think. So Kip and Nancy, this is a story from the book. I didn't make up these names. I would never have made up Kip. Kip and Nancy work for an organization that recruits talent for sought-after jobs overseas. Nancy tells Kip he seems biased against candidates with non-traditional backgrounds. Nancy says his bias is seeping through during the interviews. Kip immediately dismisses the background because he does not have a bias. His own truth and his own identity, right? Two things right there. In fact, although Nancy is not aware of it, Kip himself does not have a traditional background. So in his view, he's predisposed to folks coming in with a non-traditional background. As far as Kip can tell, the feedback is simply wrong. What should Kip do? Okay, half right.
I kind of want to know, if I were Kip, I'd want to know why they're saying that. Like,
Yeah,
what
right.
have I done that seems
Right.
makes you think that?
Right. So the answer you gave, thanks for the, right?
Well, the answer I gave is the answer that I think Kim is going to get.
Exactly, right. Or you're wrong, right? I mean, right.
Right. Hopefully,
Right.
he doesn't just say that and then have a good work.
Then we have relationship triggers too, right? So the whole point about the book is thanks for the feedback, and it says here much larger on the thanks. So the answer, the first thing that should always come out of your mouth is thanks for the feedback, thanks for sharing. Sometimes it's really hard to say that. But then you're absolutely right, Carly. That what you gave is actually doesn't accelerate it, but doesn't let Kip know. Why? Because this was a value. This was a label, right? The label is you're biased against candidates. And what Kip really needs to know is what makes you say that, right? Because I can't, if I'm Kip, I can't take anything, I can't decide whether there's truth or not unless I know why she said that, okay? Now, I have to say this is where I would take a sidebar and say, as I was reading this and thinking about being on the receiving end, I'm also thinking about, well, gosh, if I were Nancy, I just did that really badly, right? So learning about how to receive feedback is also really helpful about thinking about giving feedback. So you say that's wrong, that's not helpful. But first understand, shift from that's wrong to tell me more. Thanks for the, I mean, really, in truth, your answer to all of these things should be thanks for the feedback, tell me more. And then you can say, I'll take that under consideration next time and change or not change, but thanks for the feedback, tell me more. Because as we've been talking about, the labels are vague and confusing. The giver has information we don't, and vice versa. You know, in this case, Kip, the receiver, had information that he was a non-traditional candidate. So we each interpret the same actions differently. You also say, that's not me. One of the goals of feedback is to see your own blind spots and to discover how you come across. We can't see our faces. We can't hear our tones of voice. I got some feedback not too long ago that my face is completely readable. I was completely convinced that I had a stone face. And I know you're all laughing. So, and since that time I've been aware of it, and I think to myself, you're making a scrunchy face. Stop it. So now I'm aware I'm making a scrunchy face, but I can't stop it. But yeah, maybe. Yeah, I was right. But so you also can't hear your own tone of voice. You didn't mean to be snippy, but you were. You didn't mean to be argumentative, but you were. So we all need others to help see ourselves and our impact on those around us. So Kip, having read the book and being thoughtful, actually asked Nancy to clarify her feedback, gets the data. Nancy replies, when you interview traditional candidates, you describe the job and its challenges and see how they respond. With non-traditional candidates, you just chat about their travels with the merchant marine. You're not taking them seriously. So the data and the interpretation and then the label. The data was, it's a different conversation. The interpretation was you're not taking them seriously, and the label was you're biased against them, right? And when you hear this, now Kip understands where Nancy's coming from, but responds, I do take them seriously. I'm just looking for other things. Because if I ask the traditional questions, they're not going to be able to answer. So now Kip understands where Nancy's coming from, Nancy understands where Kip's coming from. But part of what Kip needs to appreciate as well is that what Nancy sees, other people may see, including the applicants, right? So there's truth on both sides, but if you shut it down and accept the label at face value, because again, I'm not biased against non-traditional candidates. I am a non-traditional candidate. I love non-traditional candidates. So the label didn't have the interpretation of the data. So now we have Miriam and Mark. Mark and Miriam return from the bar mitzvah of Mark's nephew. Mark tells Miriam she should not be so aloof when she is with his relatives. She responds, do you know what I went through to get to that bar mitzvah? The party for your nephew whose name you can't even remember? So what just happened here? This goes to relationship, right? So what's Miriam feeling? Totally unappreciated, right? So, I mean, this is sort of where you start to think, well, maybe sandwich feedback is helpful. Honey, it was so great of you to get to the bar mitzvah and to get all the children dressed and be a good person and get there. But, next time, could you just be a little nicer to my mother? Right? So I still think it would have gone to the relationship. But clearly, one, the relationship issues moved to center front. And the issue of perhaps and again, it's not even about truth, whether Miriam was or wasn't aloof. It's about how Mark perceived Miriam and potentially how Mark's family perceived Miriam. She didn't think she was being aloof, but perhaps she communicated that, perhaps because she was exhausted because of all the effort it took to get to the bar mitzvah, right? You say, after all, this is a relationship trigger. After all I've done for you, who are you to say these things to me? And almost all of the feedback settings we're in have some degree of relationship. As a receiver, the goal is to step back and see the relationship. The way out to hearing the feedback is to disentangle the relationship from the issues and discuss separately. And certainly anybody who's been in any therapy about conflict, they always say, the one spouse says, you're always late, and the other spouse says, but you never help me out with whatever, and that's why. So you've got two issues on the table, and in fact, you got to do one issue at a time. And that's what this is about. Separate, be open to the feedback, which is hard in a relationship. We hardly ever do this. We go right to the relationship and let the topic drop. The topic of who defeats the topic of what, and you're not open to the original feedback. So in this case, there are clearly multiple issues. Miriam's unappreciated, But if the conversation immediately goes to relationship, the concern Mark is expressing will remain unheard. So in these relationship issues, you have to own it as the receiver. You have to manage both, but they're hard to manage at the same time. So you got to be able to shelve it. Identity triggers. Third, truth, relationship, identity. Identity is who we are. When critical feedback is incoming, feedback that is discordant, our story is under attack and the security alarm sounds. Before the giver gets out the second sentence, we counterattack or pass out. And our response can range from minor agitation to profound destabilization. Profound destabilization. I get a lot of people in my office profoundly destabilized from random things. You know, that's how I keep Kleenex at 3 places in my office. So remember our initial case. This is really about identity. There are lots of other things. There's truth, there's relationship, but it's really about identity. Our program director is overwhelmed. She had a lot of triggers. Certainly truth, they're wrong, I'm not chaotic. Relationship issues at play. Who are these chiefs to be giving me this feedback? Don't I deserve some respect? Don't they know how hard I work to be available? And that probably is true. Works very hard to be available. Truth is, you're still not available. Both are true. The biggest barrier to hearing feedback was the inability for the program director to even remotely conceive that the person the chiefs were describing was her. This feedback was so counter to her self-image, she was overwhelmed and baffled and had a hard time hearing it. So identity triggers are tough. You can go to that place pretty quickly. I screw everything up. I'm doomed. I'm not a bad person. Or am I? We all also have to remember I said that feedback is not an innate skill, but there are some people whose ego strength is so great, they're just like, okay, thank you, and you kind of wonder if they actually get it. Sometimes they just like, oh, okay, great, I'll change that. That's good, Those people are pretty few and far between. There's a wide variation in the reaction to both positive and negative feedback. And I would actually take a segue and say, even for positive feedback, the appropriate answer is, thank you. It's not, I was given a lucky opportunity. Other people really helped make it happen. It was just a good opportunity, right? The answer to feedback is always thank you, positive or negative. So that's actually pretty easy, right? Just go home and just say thank you, right? You have to dismantle distortions about the identity. You have to actually see that feedback at actual size, which was a little bit the construct of they may be more emotional. It may be not quite so personal as you're perceiving it. But on the other hand, you can't dismiss it because it goes counter to your grade. And the key here for all of this is to cultivate a growth identity. Sort toward coaching. You want people to tell you what you could do to grow. So one of the pieces of advice that I gave this person is, it's not about the label. It's about what would make them, how would they feel more appreciated? I mean, she heard some of it, which was, I'm canceling them too often. I can't cancel them. Somebody else has to be canceled. But it's also to go back to them actually and say, coach me in what you need. Being open to what would make this different and what would make this better, which is a coaching. Interestingly enough, I also suggested, aka Carla, that she give the book Thanks for the Feedback to her chiefs, or the Difficult Conversations book. That's the one that she gave out. And they had a little book club to talk about difficult conversations. So I haven't heard how the book club went yet. So strategies for receiving feedback. What are we going to summarize? First, understand it. Before you can tell if the feedback is right or wrong, you have to understand it. Forget the labels. Go to the data and the interpretation. Thanks for the feedback. Tell me more. Be more, so what does it mean? Somebody says, be more proactive, be more assertive, have more confidence. You don't know what that means. You don't know what it was that generated that person giving you that feedback. Thanks for the feedback, tell me more. What makes you say that I'm not assertive? Shift from that's wrong to tell me more, because what's heard versus what's meant is surprisingly common. You know, I always tell the story of this was probably a decade ago now, but I had a faculty member that used to leave Wishwaw's office every time and come into my office in tears. I would go into Wishwaw's office. I'd say, "What did you tell Susie?" And Wishwa would say, "I told her she's wonderful." And I would say, "I don't think she heard that." You know. And so it's surprisingly common. To fully understand feedback, you need to discuss both where it's coming from, where it's going. Where the feedback is coming from means the data and the interpretation. Where the feedback is going means the coaching. What can I do to do it differently? What consequences are there? And remember to ask what's different and to think about what's different between you and the feedback giver with regard to the data and the interpretations. So, for example, that the Kip Nancy thing, right? There was incomplete data on both sides. Incomplete data. What if you still disagree? You can say thanks for the feedback. You can say tell me more. You can get the data. You can understand the interpretation. And you can still say stupid feedback. That's okay. You may get to the point of fully understanding and still disagree. While this is somewhat challenging, how to move forward, actually from a communication standpoint, it's a success. The goal in listening to feedback is to understand the feedback giver's position and for them to understand yours. Be transparent and honest after you get it. It's okay to say, wow, that's upsetting. I would never have imagined that. That's so far from how I see myself. But what is the common denominator about these three statements in a communication language place? They're all I statements. Not you are wrong. But I am upset to hear that, right? Very different. I statements, not you statements. Take-home messages. We all have blind spots. Can't see our faces, our tone of voice, even be aware of our big patterns of behavior. Blind spots are amplified by our own emotional math. We discount our emotions while others just do them double. We attribute our failure to the situation while others attribute it to character. Our program director canceled the meeting because other people had control of her schedule, and the chief trumped the chief of medicine trumped the chiefs, so it wasn't her fault. It was situational that the meeting with the chiefs got canceled. The chief residents interpreted it as she was sending them a message that they weren't important. So it was her character. And frankly, the impact intent gap. We judge ourselves by intentions and meant to be available, while others judge it by our actions. You ended up not being available. So, and the truth is always somewhere in the middle, but you got to think about both. So take-home messages: to see ourselves in our blind spots, we need help from others. The challenge is to invite others to be an honest mirror to help you see yourself. And the most important thing, other than thanks for the feedback, tell me more, is feedback is about looking forward, not looking back. Reality is in the eye of the beholder. The emotions, the triggers, everything it's not about arguing that the feedback was wrong. It's about moving forward so that you resolve the conflict and you do it differently next time. And I would ask everybody to think about, how am I getting in my own way to stop it? The source, thanks for the feedback, which I highly recommend to everybody. Questions? So I'm not 100% convinced that it's always. Yeah, I think that my view of this is what comes after you've done thanks for the feedback, tell me more, and you've established it. If somebody's, and it depends a little bit on the situation. Sometimes you just say thanks for the feedback. I'll keep that in mind next time, right? You made I don't promise to change, but I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. But if you're in a situation where you really need to negotiate out a change, right, you have to have a way of having agreeing to disagree. I agree with you completely. Sometimes it's not worth telling the giver that you don't agree with their feedback or you don't see yourself that way. Sometimes it's just to thank you, I'll take that under advisement or whatever.
Yeah, I guess the way that I'm interpreting the example is sort of what are the relative benefits of showing what are the pros and cons of that? Because I guess depending on how you're interpreting them, like, to me, those reveal like how I'm feeling deep down inside, and do I really want to share that with certain people who I may not have a.
And my answer is it depends on the relationship. It depends on the relationship and where you're going, and if this is someone that you need to work through those. So these are
I
just
didn't know if that was somehow like
no.
an added benefit to say those things that you somehow were like
No. It's a way of trying to diffuse it rather than saying you're wrong. Saying, wow, that's not how I see it, right? So it's the I statement and the you statement, and you can come up with different words depending on the strength of the relationship or the chargedness or the hierarchy, right? All those things.
Where's the place for validating something else? Talk to someone else and see little things
Absolutely, I think that's right. I mean, that's what I consider getting more data. You know, so you say to the person, "Tell me more," and then you can ask about that. That's about. I think that's if you decide that the feedback the giver gave you is appropriate, or might have a kernel of truth, or you're worried it has a kernel of truth, but you're still not convinced. That's when.
change the way you do.
So I try really hard not to do the label, but to do the data. And to say, this is what I saw, and I worry that this means. That's rather than the label. So I try to back it up and think about. And it's what we tell learners about. Don't just tell them they're not organized. Tell them that their history and physical is all over the place, right? So I try to do that in all the feedback I give my data. What I saw that worried me, and what the data makes me be worried about. What I saw rather than the label. It's work in progress. That, for me, that's what, because then if you do that, you jumpstart the communication, right? Jumpstart the communication. You've already given the receiver the opportunity to ask more. So go forth, say thank you, tell me more. Thanks, everybody.